The first footage Keith Rasool ever broadcast from the surface of Endar 7 was 41 seconds of silence. Not dead silence. The recording captured the ambient noise of the jungle canopy, the rhythmic drip of condensation from leaves the size of shuttle doors, the distant crack of something large moving through undergrowth, the low harmonic drone of the bioluminescent fungal colonies that covered every surface below the canopy line and gave the air its faint green-gold glow. But for 41 seconds, Keithra's narration track was empty. She had pressed the record indicator on her chest-mounted camera, opened her mouth to deliver the introduction she had rehearsed 14 times on the orbital shuttle, and said nothing. She was looking at the Veska. 4 of them. Adults moving single file along a game trail 30 meters below the observation platform, where Keithra and her crew stood behind a mesh of camouflage netting. The largest later identified in her field notes as the Territorial Patriarch, designation V', was roughly the mass of a Torvathi cargo skiff and carried itself with the slow, deliberate economy of a creature that had never needed to hurry. Its hide was a deep iridescent black that shifted to bruised violet where the bioluminescent light caught it, layered in overlapping scale plates that flexed like articulated armor when it breathed. 6 limbs, the front 4 ending in curved grasping talons that left gouges in the hardwood trail surface, the rear 2 in broad flat pads that distributed its weight across the soft jungle floor without sound. Its skull was long and narrow, vaguely canid, with a crest of crystalline spines running from the brow ridge to the base of the neck that caught the fungal glow and refracted it in pale prismatic arcs. 2 primary eyes, amber, forward-set predator placement. 4 secondary eyes, smaller, arranged in a lateral arc behind the primaries, covering nearly 300 degrees of visual field. The second adult was smaller, leaner, with a hide that shifted from deep blue-black to slate-gray depending on the angle. The third was broader, heavily scarred across its left flank, 1 crystalline spine on its crest snapped short. The fourth was a juvenile, not a cub, but an adolescent, perhaps 2/3 the patriarch's mass, moving with the slightly uncoordinated energy of a body still growing into its own frame. They passed below the platform in absolute silence. Not one of them looked up. That was 8 years ago. The 41 seconds of silence became the opening of Endar's Children, the most-watched xenofaunal documentary series in the history of Torvathi broadcast media. 87 million viewers across 14 systems watched a Torvathi filmmaker stand on a platform and fail to speak, and every one of them understood why. But the 41 seconds of silence was not the beginning of the story. The beginning was earlier, and it belonged to someone else. Keith Rasool had been documenting alien wildlife for 22 years before she came to Endar 7. She had built her career on a particular talent for translating the behavior of non-sentient alien species into narratives that Torvathi audiences, a species that had spent 3,000 years as the galaxy's most prolific classifiers and catalogers of biological systems, could feel rather than merely study. She had filmed the mating displays of salvic cloud whales in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant, their bodies half a kilometer long, their subsonic songs carrying across 1,000 kilometers of hydrogen-dense air. She had documented the seasonal migration of armored beetle herds across the salt flats of Korsh 9, 200 million individuals moving as a single organism, their chitinous shells turning the desert into a river of bronze. She had spent 3 months in an underwater habitat filming the symbiotic colony mines of the Pelari Deep Reef, organisms so alien that the Torvathi Biological Survey had debated for 40 years whether to classify them as fauna, flora, or geology. None of it had prepared her for the Veska. The Torvathi had known about Endar 7 apex predator for decades. The initial survey teams had cataloged the species, measured it, sampled its genetic material, mapped its territorial ranges, and filed a report classifying it as a Category 8 solitary macropredator of moderate intelligence, social structure unknown, threat level high. The report was efficient, thorough, and as Keithra would spend the next 3 years demonstrating, almost entirely wrong. The Veska were not solitary. They lived in extended family groups of 8 to 16 individuals with complex hierarchical bonds, coordinated hunting strategies, and a vocal communication system that the survey teams had missed entirely because it operated at frequencies below the standard range of Torvathi recording equipment. They were not of moderate intelligence. Keithra's behavioral observations over 3 years documented tool use, cooperative problem solving, what appeared to be grief rituals when a group member died, and a form of teaching in which adults deliberately modified their hunting technique in the presence of juveniles, slowing down, exaggerating movements, repeating sequences in a pattern that any developmental psychologist would have recognized as pedagogy. And their social structure was not unknown. It was matrilineal, anchored by a breeding female whose authority was absolute and whose death triggered a succession crisis that could fracture a group for months. The Torvathi survey had missed all of it because they had observed from orbit, from drones, from armored survey vehicles that the Veska treated as mobile territorial intrusions and avoided or attacked. The survey teams had measured the species from a distance that guaranteed they would see only the surface size, speed, lethality, and had filed a report that reduced one of the most complex social predators in cataloged space to a line item in a planetary risk assessment. Keithra had come to Endar 7 to make a documentary. What she found changed the way half the galaxy thought about what it meant to be an animal. But that came later. First, there was Marin Cade. The human had been on Endar 7 for 2 years before Keithra's crew arrived, and the Torvathi Frontier Bureau's file on her was remarkably thin. Marin Cade, female, mid-30s, occupation listed as wildlife consultant independent. She had arrived on a cross-species research visa, self-funded, attached to no university, no institution, no government program. The visa application listed her qualifications as 15 years of fieldwork with large terrestrial predators on a planet called Earth: bears, big cats, wolves. The Frontier Bureau had approved the visa with a notation that the applicant's research plan, which involved ground-level behavioral observation of Veska family groups using non-invasive proximity methods, was within acceptable risk parameters for a self-funded independent researcher, bureaucratic language that meant, if she dies, it is not our problem. Keithra's pre-production team had pulled the file as part of their background research. One of her producers, a Torvathi named Bellin, had flagged it with a note. Human researcher, ground level solo, 2 years in Veska territory, still alive. Worth interviewing. Keithra had looked at the file and felt something she had not felt in years, the particular sharpening of professional curiosity that meant a story was about to become something larger than its original brief. A documentary about the Veska was a nature film. A documentary about a human woman who had spent 2 years alone in the territory of a Category 8 apex predator and had somehow survived was something else entirely. It was a character study. It was, if Keithra was being honest about the commercial calculation that every broadcast producer learns to make, exactly the kind of cross-species tension that drove ratings through the canopy. She told her crew they were expanding the scope. The Veska were the subject, but Marin Cade was the hook. That calculation, the hook, the spectacle, the reduction of a living bond to a content package, was the thing Keithra would spend the next 3 years coming to terms with. But she did not know that yet. At that point, Keithra Sewell was a documentarian with a 22-year track record of turning alien biology into broadcast gold, and she carried the professional certainty of someone whose instincts had never been wrong about what made good footage. The Veska were the predator. Marin was the drama. The jungle was the set. The audience would eat it alive. She briefed her crew on the new scope during the shuttle descent. Bellin pulled up Marin's published field notes on his data tablet and read them aloud, Translating the dry behavioral language into production beats, proximity habituation became the approach sequence, chemosignal tolerance became the sniff test, and the moment Marin described as first uninitiated tactile contact became, in Bellin's notes, the money shot. Keithra listened and did not correct him. She should have. That was the first mistake. They found Marin's camp on the fourth day. It was not what Keithra had expected. She had imagined something defensive: perimeter fences, motion sensors, and armored shelter. Instead, she found a low-slung prefab habitat with an open-sided awning, positioned at the edge of a clearing where the jungle canopy thinned enough to let pale green-gold light filter to the forest floor. No fences, no perimeter technology that Keithra could identify, a water collection system, a small garden plot with plants Keithra did not recognize, a rack of hand tools nothing powered, nothing that hummed or emitted frequencies, a fire pit cold, a wooden bench. And tracks. Veska tracks, circling the clearing in overlapping patterns that even Keithra's untrained eye could read as repeated, habitual passage. The tracks were everywhere along the tree line, across the clearing's eastern edge, converging on a muddy depression near the water collection system where something very large had recently lain down. The ground cover around the habitat was not just disturbed. It was worn. Whatever came here came often. Marin was sitting on the bench when they arrived. She was eating something from a metal bowl. She looked up as Keithra's crew emerged from the tree line, 5 Torvathi in field gear, carrying recording equipment, their crest veins elevated in the involuntary alertness posture that the species exhibited in unfamiliar territory, and her expression settled into something that was not quite welcome and not quite refusal. Assessment. The look of someone deciding how much trouble had just walked into her clearing. "Your Soul," Marin said, "the documentary crew. You received our message." "I received it." She ate another mouthful from the bowl. "I told the Frontier Bureau I didn't want visitors. They granted us access." "They granted you access to the survey zone, not to my camp, but you're here, so..." She set the bowl down. "What do you need?" Keithra studied her. Marin was compact. Not small, but built close to the ground, the way people are who have spent years carrying weight across uneven terrain. Her hands were calloused, sun-darkened, scarred across the knuckles in the particular pattern of someone who had spent time working around large mouths and had not always moved fast enough. Her face was plain, weather-lined, unremarkable. Her eyes were gray-green and very still. She wore a faded utility vest over a worn thermal shirt, canvas trousers patched at both knees, boots that had been resoled at least twice. She did not look like someone who had spent 2 years inside the territory of one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. She looked like someone who had stopped thinking about it. "We want to film you," Keithra said. "Filming me is not the same as filming the Veska. We want to film both." "Then you need to understand something." Marin's voice did not change pitch or volume. "The Veska tolerate me because I have spent 2 years earning that tolerance. I sit where they can see me. I move slowly. I do not carry equipment that emits frequencies in their communication band. I do not approach them. They approach me. Every interaction is on their terms. If your crew comes in with powered recording equipment, drone feeds, active sensors, the group will treat you as a territorial incursion. They will not attack. They will simply leave. And they will not come back for months if they come back at all. 2 years of habituation gone. We can adapt our equipment, passive recording only, no drones." Marin looked at the crew behind Keithra. 5 Torvathi, crest veins still elevated, carrying cases of equipment that hummed faintly with standby power. She looked at Bellin, who was already framing shots with a handheld scanner, his 4-fingered hands adjusting the aperture with professional ease. "Your people are afraid," Marin said. "I can see it in the vein posture. Fear makes noise. It changes breathing patterns, body chemistry. The Veska can read chemo signals at 50 meters. If your crew is broadcasting stress hormones while they film, the group will read it as a threat response. Not from your crew, from whatever your crew is afraid of. They will assume there is a predator nearby that they cannot see, and they will go into defensive mode. A Veska family group in defensive mode is not something you want to be near. Keithra had worked with 3 human consultants across her career. All of them had been direct, spare with language, more comfortable with silence than any Torvathi she had met. Marin was no different. The speech was not a lecture. It was a field briefing, delivered with the flat, practical clarity of someone who had learned the information the hard way and did not intend to repeat the lesson. "What do you recommend?" Keithra asked. Marin studied her. Whatever she was calculating took 4 seconds. "2 of you, maximum. You and 1 camera operator. Passive equipment only. I will inspect everything before you take it into the field. You stay behind me at all times. You do not speak unless I tell you it is safe. You do not move toward any Veska individual for any reason. If I say stop, you stop. If I say leave, you leave. No negotiation, no second takes, no just one more shot. The Veska are not performers. They do not owe you content." Keithra looked at Bellin. Bellin's crest veins flattened the Torvathi expression of professional distress. His mouth opened to object. Keithra shook her head once. He closed it. "Agreed," Keithra said. The first week taught Keithra more about patience than 22 years of wildlife filmmaking. Marin's method was absolute stillness. She sat at the edge of the clearing every morning before dawn, on a flat rock that she had chosen in her first month because the Veska patriarch used the adjacent game trail during his morning territorial circuit. She sat cross-legged, hands resting on her knees, facing the trail. She did not move. She did not speak. She breathed with a slow, deliberate rhythm that Keithra eventually realized was intentional, a controlled pattern designed to keep her chemo signal output neutral and steady. Keithra sat behind her, and to the right, 2 meters back, the passive camera mounted on a low tripod that Marin had approved after inspecting it for 30 minutes and dismantling the power cell to verify it emitted no electromagnetic pulse above baseline. Bellin sat behind Keithra, his handheld unit recording ambient audio and bioluminescence levels. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved except to breathe. The first morning, nothing happened. The clearing hummed with the baseline sounds of the jungle drip, drone, creak, and nothing moved on the game trail. The second morning, Keithra heard something in the undergrowth to the east, heavy, deliberate, the rhythmic crack and settle of something very large placing its feet with care. It lasted 4 minutes. Then it stopped, and the jungle returned to baseline. "V'," Marin said, so quietly that Keithra almost missed it. "He is checking. He knows you are here. He is deciding." "Deciding what?" "Whether you are worth the risk." On the third morning, Keithra saw the Veska from ground level for the first time. V' emerged from the tree line 40 meters to the east, moving along the game trail with the slow, ground-covering stride that Keithra had filmed from the observation platform 8 years earlier. The patriarch. Bigger than she had estimated from above, the overhead angle compressed the creature's mass. And from ground level, the true scale registered in a way that the rational, taxonomic part of Keithra's mind categorized, and the older, deeper part answered with a pulse of adrenaline she felt in her throat. He was enormous. The iridescent black of his scale plates drank the bioluminescent light and gave it back as shifting bruised violet, and the crystalline spines along his crest caught the pale dawn glow and scattered it in prismatic arcs that moved as the creature moved. His 4 primary limbs placed each step with a precision that belied his mass, and the 6 amber eyes, 2 primary, 4 lateral, swept the clearing in a continuous scan that missed nothing. He stopped at the edge of the trail, 30 meters from Marin, his primary eyes fixed on her. Keithra's hand tightened on her armrest. Behind her, Bellin's breathing changed, a short, sharp intake that he cut off immediately but that Keithra heard, and that She was certain V' heard as well. Marin did not move. Her hands stayed on her knees. Her breathing did not change. The biosensor clipped to Kithra's vest confirmed it: no cortisol spike, no adrenaline surge. The woman sitting 2 meters in front of Kithra was looking at 700 kilograms of apex predator, and her body was responding as though she were looking at a tree. V''s crest spines flattened. Not a threat display. Kithra had filmed enough Veska from the platform to know the difference. The opposite. The crystalline spines lay down against the skull in what Marin's published field notes described as receptive calm. His jaw closed, all 6 eyes oriented forward, fixed on Marin. He stepped off the trail onto the clearing floor. 1 step, 2, 3, each footfall placed with the deliberate care of something that was choosing to be gentle. He stopped 4 meters from Marin. He lowered his head until his skull was level with hers. He breathed. Kithra could hear it, a low, resonant exhalation that carried a subsonic undertone she felt in her sternum. The crystalline spines along his crest hummed with the vibration, scattering pale light. Not a growl, not a threat. The sound of a creature that had walked this trail every morning for 2 years and had found the same small, warm-blooded biped sitting in the same place, and had decided, over hundreds of repetitions, that this was part of the pattern. Marin lifted one hand slowly. She extended it, palm down, fingers relaxed, not reaching toward V', just offering, a passive contact invitation that placed the decision entirely with the animal. V''s primary nostrils flared. He leaned forward, his muzzle lined with sensory pits that Marin's research had identified as chemoreceptor, arrays capable of detecting individual biochemical signatures at ranges exceeding 100 meters, touched Marin's palm. The contact lasted 3 seconds. Marin's fingers curled slightly against the underside of V''s jaw where the scale plates thinned to softer, more pliable hide. Then V' pulled back, turned, and continued along the trail. His crest spines elevated as he passed the tree line and disappeared into the undergrowth. The clearing returned to its baseline hum. Marin lowered her hand. She turned to Kithra. Her expression was the same flat, practical assessment it had been since they arrived. That, she said, was good morning. Behind Kithra, Bellin made a sound. Reviewing the audio later, Kithra identified it as the Torvathi involuntary vocalization of awe, a harmonic chitter the species produced when confronted with something that exceeded its existing categorical framework. Bellin had been filming wildlife for 15 years. He had never made that sound on a recording before. That evening, Kithra sat in the temporary shelter reviewing the footage on her portable screen. She watched V' lower his head to Marin's level 14 times. She slowed the moment of contact to quarter speed and watched the chemoreceptor pits along V''s muzzle dilate as they sampled Marin's palm, a motion so subtle that at normal speed it looked like a simple touch, but at quarter speed revealed itself as a full biochemical assessment performed in under a second. V' had not merely touched Marin. He had read her. Her stress markers, her hormone levels, her metabolic state, the bacterial signature of her skin. He had gathered more diagnostic information from a 3-second contact than the Frontier Bureau's medical intake had gathered from Marin's entire visa application. Bellin sat across from her, his own screen showing the same footage from his secondary angle. She did not flinch, he said. Her biosensor readout was flat. 0 cortisol spike. Kithra, I have filmed Torvathi handlers working with domesticated service animals category 2, bred for compliance, and they show more stress response than she did. She has done this every morning for 2 years. That is not the point. The point is that she has trained herself to be invisible to the most sensitive chemoreceptor array in cataloged biology. She does not just sit still. She sits still in a way that makes her biochemistry silent. I have never seen a sentient being do that. Kithra looked at the freeze frame on her screen. Marin's hand extended, V'Prime's muzzle touching, the green-gold light filtering through the canopy behind them. It was, she thought, the most extraordinary piece of wildlife footage she had ever captured, and some part of her already knew that the network would not see it that way. Over the following weeks, the scope of what Marin had built became clear to Kithra, and the scope of what she had originally planned to make with it became a problem. Marin had not merely survived in Veska territory, she had been accepted. The family group, 16 individuals spanning 4 generations, from V'Prime and the matriarch down to 3 cubs born in the current season, treated her presence as a fixed element of their daily circuit. They did not avoid the clearing, they rooted through it. The matriarch, a massive female with a deep blue-black hide and a crystalline crest more elaborate than V'Prime's, brought the cubs to the clearing on a near-daily schedule, and Kithra filmed interactions that made her rethink every assumption she had carried into the project. The cubs, 2 females and a male, roughly the size of large dogs, their scale plates still soft, and their crystalline spines transparent and fragile, approached Marin with the uncomplicated trust of young animals that had never learned to fear her. The boldest cub, which Marin had designated C3, would climb onto Marin's lap and press its muzzle against her chest and close all 6 eyes. The sound it made a low, rhythmic vibration that resonated through the crystalline spines and produced a faint harmonic glow was, according to Marin's published analysis, the Veska equivalent of a purr. A contact maintenance vocalization produced exclusively in contexts of safety and social bonding. Marin would sit with C3 on her lap and not move. She would rest one hand on the cub's spine between the translucent spines, and the cub's vibration would deepen. The other 2 cubs would sit nearby, watching, occasionally approaching to sniff Marin's boots or investigate the hem of her vest. The matriarch would lie 20 meters away, her 6 eyes half closed, her massive body arranged in the posture that Marin's research defined as guardian rest, relaxed but oriented, like a mother napping with one eye on the nursery door. Kithra filmed it all. The footage was extraordinary broadcast-quality passive recording of a Category 8 apex predator's cubs in physical contact with a human, the matriarch tolerating proximity that would have triggered a lethal defensive response against any other species. Each morning session yielded new detail. V'Prime's morning greeting became a ritual Kithra could predict to the minute. The scarred male, V3, began positioning himself on the game trail between the clearing and the crew's shuttle, not threatening, but present, a sentinel whose amber eyes tracked every piece of equipment they carried in or out. The juvenile, nearly adult-sized now, started appearing at the clearing's edge in the late afternoon, watching Marin write in her field journal with the fixed attention of a young predator studying an unfamiliar behavior. By the 4th week, the matriarch had adjusted the family's morning route. Instead of approaching the clearing from the north, where the canopy was densest and the approach most protected, the group now entered from the west, a more exposed path, but one that brought the cubs past Marin's rock first. It was, Kithra realized as she reviewed the footage, the Veska equivalent of a mother taking the children to school via the friendly neighbor's house. The matriarch was not merely tolerating Marin. She was building the human into the cub's daily routine. And Kithra, watching the playback in her temporary shelter each night, began to feel the documentary shifting beneath her. She had come to make a nature film with a human hook. The pitch she had sold to the network was clear: alien predator, dangerous jungle, extraordinary woman, dramatic tension. The marketing team had already drafted promotional language: 1 woman, 1 predator, the most dangerous jungle in charted space. They wanted confrontation. They wanted the moment when things went wrong. They wanted the beast, and they wanted the beast to be terrifying because terror sold. What Kithra was filming was not terror. It was a woman sitting in a clearing with a cub on her lap and a patriarch who said good morning with a touch on the palm. It was a matriarch who brought her children to the human the way a neighbor brings kids to a trusted friend's house. It was a family that had looked at this small, soft, clawless biped and decided she belonged. The network would not want this. Keithra knew it the way she knew lens angles and light levels with the automatic certainty of someone who had spent 2 decades in the industry. They wanted the spectacle. They wanted a story that put the Veska in a frame that Torvathi audiences would find thrilling and alien and safely distant. What Keithra was looking at through the camera was not safely distant. It was intimate, and it was inconvenient, because intimacy required the audience to see the Veska as something more than a line item in a planetary risk assessment. She did not call the network, not yet. She kept filming. The confrontation came in the 6th week, and it did not come from the jungle. Bellin had been pushing back since week 2. He was a good camera operator and a pragmatic producer, and he understood what the network had bought and what they expected delivered. He cornered Keithra after a review session where she had spent 40 minutes showing him footage of C3 sleeping on Marin's lap. "This is not the show," he said. His crest veins were elevated in the flat, sustained posture that meant a Torvathi was about to say something he had been thinking for a long time. The network bought a predator documentary. They bought danger and spectacle and a human surviving against odds. What you are filming is a woman sitting still while cubs sleep on her. It is beautiful. It is not what we sold. The Veska are not what the survey report said they were. What Marin has documented changes everything we thought about this species. The Torvathi audience does not tune in for a change of scientific opinion. They tune in for the beast. We need the beast. The beast is not a beast, Bellin. That is the story. That is a thesis statement. It is not a broadcast. If we deliver a character study about a human woman and her tame predators, the network will shelf it. 2 years of work, the most expensive production deployment in our division's history, shelved because we decided to make a film about patience instead of peril. Keithra looked at the playback screen, paused on a frame of Marin in the clearing. The light was the particular green-gold of early morning, and C3 was pressed against Marin's side with its translucent spines catching the glow. Behind them, V' was a dark shape on the trail's edge, massive and still and patient. "What are you proposing?" Keithra asked. The network's wildlife division sent updated guidelines last week. They want us to deploy observation drones for aerial coverage of the pack's hunting sequences. They want close-range footage of territorial displays, V'Prime's confrontations with rival males in the adjacent territory. They want kill footage, Keithra, the Veska taking down prey in coordinated formation, and they want the human angle to be survival-coded. The narrative frame needs to position Marin as someone in constant danger, surviving by her wits, one wrong move from being another statistic. That is not what is happening. That is what we sell. The truth and the broadcast are 2 different products. You know this. And the drones. Marin said powered equipment in the territory would destroy the habituation. The network's position is that the habituation is the researchers' concern, not ours. We are here to make a broadcast, not to protect a human's personal relationship with a predator population. Keithra did not answer immediately. She thought about the 41 seconds of silence that had started her career on Endar 7, the moment when she had seen V' for the first time and had forgotten to speak. She thought about what Marin had said on the first day. The Veska are not performers. They do not owe you content. She thought about the cub sleeping against Marin's side, and the matriarch's half-closed eyes and V''s muzzle against Marin's palm. She thought about what it would mean to deploy drones over that, clearing the high-frequency whine of the rotors, the electromagnetic signature, the alien machine dropping into the airspace of a family that had spent 2 years learning that this small patch of jungle was safe. She thought about the matriarch hearing the drone and pulling the cubs into the deep den and not coming back. "No," Keithra said. "Keithra. No drones, no kill footage, No survival frame narrative. What we are filming is something that has never been recorded. A human accepted into the social structure of a Category 8 apex predator, the most complex social predator in cataloged space, and it chose to let her in. If the network cannot see the value in that, the network is wrong. Bellin's crest veins flattened. You are going to lose the show. Then I will lose the show. It was not bravado. It was the voice Keithra had heard in Marin's flat, practical briefing on the first day, the certainty of someone who had seen something and could not unsee it. Bellin sent the footage to the network anyway. Not the quiet footage, the early material, the approach sequences, the shots Keithra had approved for transmission. But he also sent a production memo recommending the deployment of observation drones and requesting authorization for a revised narrative framework emphasizing survival tension and predator spectacle. Keithra found out when the network's response arrived 3 days later, addressed to her. A directive authorizing drone deployment, requesting close-range predatory behavior footage, and noting that the production's current editorial direction was insufficiently aligned with audience expectations for the genre. She read it in her shelter. She read it again. She closed the message and walked to the clearing. Marin was on her rock. The family group had moved to their midday resting site in the deep canopy. The light was diffuse and warm and quiet. I need to tell you something, Keithra said. She told her everything, the network's directive, Bellin's memo, the drones, the kill footage request, the survival frame narrative. She did not soften it. She did not excuse it. She stood in the clearing where a cub had slept on a human's lap and told the truth about what her industry intended to do with the footage of it. Marin listened. Her face did not change. When Keithra finished, Marin was quiet for a long time. The jungle filled the silence, drip, drone, the distant movement of something large in the canopy. If you deploy drones, Marin said, the group will treat them as a territorial threat. They will go into defensive mode. The cubs will be moved to the deep den. The matriarch will not bring them to the clearing again for weeks, possibly months. The habituation that took me 2 years to build will be damaged. It may not recover. I know. If you frame this as a survival story, the human at risk, the beast as the threat, you will be telling a lie. The Veska are not a threat to me. They are a family that has allowed me to sit with them. The danger narrative serves your audience's expectations. It does not serve the truth. I know that too. Then why are you telling me? Keithra sat down on the bench. She had not been invited to sit. She sat anyway because she was tired and the honesty had cost something, and the wooden surface was warm in the filtered green-gold light. Because I came here to make a film about the Veska. And what I found is a film about what it costs to see something clearly and what it costs when someone decides that seeing clearly is less valuable than seeing spectacularly. I am not going to deploy the drones. I am not going to frame this as a survival story. I am going to make the film that the footage demands. And I am telling you because you deserve to know that the decision is not free. I will likely lose the broadcast. I will likely lose my commission. My producer has already gone over my head, but I have sat in your clearing for 6 weeks and watched Vprime touch your hand every morning, and I cannot make the film they want. Not after that. Marin studied her, the same 4-second assessment she had given on the first day. Then she did something Keithra had not seen her do in 6 weeks of daily contact. She smiled, small, barely there, the expression of someone who had spent 2 years earning the trust of creatures that could kill her and had just recognized in another species entirely the same quality that had earned it. Good, Marin said. Come back tomorrow, bring your camera. The matriarch is teaching the cubs to track scent trails. You have never seen anything like it. Keithra made the film. Not the film the network wanted. She sent the directive back with a single-line response, respectfully declined. The footage speaks for itself. She attached 12 minutes of unedited material. Marin in the clearing, V''s morning greeting, C3 on Marin's lap, the matriarch's half-closed eyes 20 meters away, the crystalline spines catching the green-gold light. The network's response was immediate and bureaucratic. Production funding suspended. Crew recalled. Keith Rasool's editorial authority revoked pending review. Bellin left on the extraction shuttle 2 days later. He took 3 of the other crew members with him. Keithra stayed. She stayed because she had a handheld camera with 3 months of battery life and a passive recording rig that Marin had approved, and because something had happened that she had not expected. The morning after Bellin left, Keithra sat behind Marin's rock for the dawn session as usual. The clearing was quieter without the crew's baseline electromagnetic noise. Marin had mentioned that the equipment's standby hum, inaudible to Torvathi ears, had been detectable to the Veska at ranges up to 30 meters. With the crew gone, the clearing's electromagnetic signature dropped to near zero for the first time since Keithra's arrival. V' arrived on schedule. He performed the morning greeting 3 seconds, muzzle to palm, the low subsonic hum. Then he did something new. Instead of continuing down the trail, he turned and walked to the edge of the clearing where Bellin's equipment cases had been stacked. He lowered his head and sniffed the ground where the cases had sat. His crest spines twitched once. He lifted his head, looked at Marin, and produced a single low vocalization that Keithra's audio recorder captured at 18 Hz, well below Torvathi hearing range, but within the frequency band that Marin's research had identified as the Veska's social communication channel. He noticed, Marin said. The noisy ones are gone. He is confirming it with me. V' looked at Keithra. His primary eyes held her for 2 seconds longer than he had ever looked directly at her. Then his crest spines flattened, and he continued down the trail. That was an assessment, Marin said. He has just decided you are part of the reduced group. He is updating his model of who is here. Over the following days, the change accelerated. Without the crew's electromagnetic noise and chemical stress signatures, the family group's behavior in the clearing shifted. The matriarch began bringing the cubs to the clearing during Keithra's filming sessions, not tolerating Keithra's presence as a neutral intrusion, but routing through on schedule, the way the group routed through when Marin was there alone. The matriarch had looked at Keithra with 6 amber eyes and had arrived at some conclusion that Keithra could not read, but that Marin could. She has categorized you, Marin said one morning, watching the matriarch settle into her guardian rest posture with the cubs playing in the clearing. Not as a threat, not as a feature, something in between. You are one of mine as far as she is concerned. The one who sits behind me and does not make noise. Keithra filmed everything alone. The matriarch teaching the cubs to track 3 cubs following scent trails across the clearing floor with exaggerated theatrical intensity, while the matriarch watched from her resting position and produced low corrective vocalizations when C3 veered off the trail. V''s territorial patrol, walking the perimeter with the scarred male flanking him, the 2 of them moving in a coordinated sweep that covered every approach angle. The juvenile practicing its hunting strike on a fallen log, the 4 grasping talons shredding bark in a sequence so fast that only the slow-motion playback revealed the individual movements. The evening gathering, when the entire family group converged on the deep canopy resting site and arranged themselves in communal rest configuration, adults on the perimeter, juveniles inward, cubs in the center, the matriarch at the highest point with a sightline to every approach. She filmed Marin sitting in the center of that configuration, writing in her field journal, while C3 slept against her knee and V' lay 3 meters away with his massive skull resting on his forelimbs, his crystalline crest spines dimmed to a faint glow, his 6 eyes half closed in the deep calm of a creature at rest among its own. And she filmed the morning that changed everything. It was the 9th week. The dawn was gray, Indar 7 rainy season had begun, and the bioluminescent fungal colonies had brightened in response, turning the jungle floor into a landscape of soft green-gold light under low, heavy clouds. Rain fell in a steady, vertical curtain that drummed on the canopy above and filtered through as a fine mist that settled on everything. The family group was in the clearing, all 16 individuals. Keithra had never seen the full group assembled in the open before. Usually the morning visit involved V Prime, the matriarch, and the cubs, with the other adults and juveniles moving through at intervals. Today, every member of the family was present. They were not in their hunting configuration. They were not in their territorial defense posture. They were arranged in the communal rest formation, adults on the perimeter, juveniles inward, but they were all facing the same direction. They were facing the trail that led to the eastern ridge, and they were silent. Marin was not sitting. She was standing. Keithra had never seen her stand during a morning session. She was facing the eastern trail, her body slightly turned, her weight on her back foot, a posture that Keithra, after 6 weeks of close observation, recognized as alert readiness. "There is a rival male on the eastern ridge," Marin said, her voice barely audible. "He has been pushing into V Prime's territory for 3 days. The scent markers I found yesterday were fresh. He is larger than V Prime, younger." V Prime was not on the trail. V Prime was standing at the eastern edge of the clearing, his crest spines fully elevated, his scale plates flared. His body broadened into the threat display configuration that Keithra had only seen in footage from the observation platform. He was facing the tree line. His jaw was open, the double row of shearing teeth visible, and from his chest came a sound that Keithra felt in her bones, a deep, subsonic territorial challenge that vibrated through the jungle floor and made the rain mist shiver. The scarred male flanked him on the right. The juvenile, now almost V Prime's height, though leaner, held the left. The matriarch had moved the cubs behind Marin, positioning them between the human and her own body in a configuration that Keithra understood with wordless clarity. The matriarch had placed the cubs where she believed they were safest, and that place was behind Marin Cade. Something moved in the tree line, a shape darker than the shadows, larger than V Prime. "Do not move," Marin said. The rival male emerged from the canopy edge. He was bigger, taller by half a meter, broader, his hide a deep matte black without the violet iridescence of V Prime's group. His crystalline crest was longer, more elaborate, and it blazed with refracted light as his threat display activated. His eyes 6, like all Veska, but with a pale gold iris instead of amber, swept the clearing. They stopped on Marin. The rival male had never seen a human. His territorial circuit did not pass through Marin's clearing. He was encountering a species he had no framework for, a small, clawless biped, standing in the center of a rival family group's formation, positioned behind the patriarch and in front of the cubs. His crest spines flattened, not in receptive calm, in assessment. The same calculating stillness that Keithra had seen in V Prime on their first ground-level encounter, but without the 2 years of habituation that had softened it. The rival male took a step forward. V Prime's subsonic challenge deepened. The scarred male's jaw opened. The juvenile shifted its weight forward, loading its forelimbs. And Marin did something that Keithra later replayed 47 times. She stepped forward, past V Prime, into the space between the patriarch and the rival male. She raised one hand, palm out, toward the rival, not aggressive, not defensive. The same passive contact posture she used with V Prime every morning, an offer, a choice. "Easy," she said, quiet, steady. The same tone she used with the cubs when they startled at a sound in the canopy. "Easy, big one." The rival male froze, not in fear, in confusion. His crest spines oscillated up, down, up, the Veska equivalent of cognitive overload. His 6 eyes fixed on Marin's hand, on her face, on the clearing behind her where 16 Veska and 1 Torvathi Filmmaker stood in absolute stillness. V Prime did not charge. He had not moved. His subsonic challenge continued, but its frequency had shifted. Kithra could feel the difference in her sternum, a change from the sharp territorial warning to something lower, steadier. Marin's published research had described this shift as anchored presence, the patriarch signaling not aggression but territorial certainty. I am here. This is mine. This is not negotiable. The rival male looked at Marin. He looked at V'. He looked at the scarred male and the juvenile and the matriarch and the cubs arrayed behind a creature that was not Veska and not prey and not anything his instincts had a category for. He turned. He stepped back into the tree line. His crest spine stayed elevated for another 30 seconds, visible as a line of pale light retreating through the undergrowth, and then they dimmed, and the jungle swallowed him, and the clearing was quiet. V'Prime's challenge faded. His crest spines lowered. He turned his head and looked at Marin with his primary eyes, and the expression, if an alien predator's face could hold an expression, was something that Kithra, in 22 years of wildlife filmmaking, had never seen directed at a member of another species. Recognition, not the blank tolerance of an animal accustomed to a human scent. She is pack. She stood in the line. She belongs here. V'Prime stepped forward and pressed his muzzle against Marin's palm, not the 3-second morning greeting. He held the contact. His crystalline spines hummed. The subsonic vibration that came from his chest was not territorial and not a threat. It was the sound Marin had classified in her research as affiliative resonance, the vocalization Veska produced when reaffirming social bonds within the family group. Behind Marin, C3 chirped. The cub scrambled forward, pressed against Marin's legs, and wrapped its forelimbs around her calf with the uncoordinated grip of a young animal that had just been frightened and wanted the nearest safe thing. Marin's free hand dropped to the cub's crest, fingers resting between the translucent spines, and the cub's glow deepened. Kithra realized she was crying. She could feel the tears on her face, warm against the cool mist. The camera was still recording. She let it run. Indar's Children aired 14 months later, not on the network that had commissioned it. Kithra had taken the footage to an independent distributor, a small outfit that specialized in long-form scientific documentary work for educational channels. They had watched 12 minutes of unedited material and bought the entire project in a single meeting. The broadcast opened with the 41 seconds of silence. Then it cut to Marin's clearing, and for 3 hours it showed what a human woman and a family of apex predators looked like when the camera stopped trying to make them into a spectacle and started simply watching. It broke every viewership record the distributor had ever set. 87 million initial viewers, 300 million within a year. It was translated into 41 languages and distributed across 14 systems. The Torvathi Biological Survey revised its classification of the Veska from Category 8 Solitary Macropredator to Category 8 Social Apex Predator, Complex Hierarchical Bonding, High Intelligence. The Planetary Survey report that had reduced the species to a line item was formally withdrawn and replaced with a 700-page document that cited Marin Cade's field observations on nearly every page. The original network that had pulled Kithra's funding sent a formal request for distribution rights. Kithra declined. The independent distributor's legal team wrote a response so polite and so devastating that it circulated through the Torvathi broadcast industry for months afterward as a masterclass in professional courtesy, weaponized beyond recovery. Bellin sent Kithra a message. It was short. "You were right, I was wrong, the footage is extraordinary." Kithra did not reply. She sent him a link to the broadcast. It was enough. The documentary changed more than the Veska's classification. It changed the conversation. Across 14 systems, xenobiologists began revisiting survey reports for species that had been cataloged from armored vehicles and orbital drones and long-range sensors. The Torvathi Science Council, issued a quiet internal memo acknowledging that proximity aversion methodology, the practice of studying dangerous species from maximum distance using maximum technology, might produce data that was technically accurate and categorically incomplete. The memo cited Endar's children by name. It cited Marin Cade's field methodology by name. It did not cite Keith Rasool, because Keithra had not discovered anything. She had simply pointed a camera at someone who had, and had refused to look away when the industry told her to. That distinction mattered to Keithra. It was the thing she carried from Endar 7 that no award or viewership number could touch, the understanding that the best thing she had ever done in her career was not finding the story, but refusing to turn it into something else. 3 years after the documentary aired, Keithra returned to Endar 7. She came alone, one camera, passive recording only. Marin met her at the clearing's edge. She looked the same, a little grayer at the temples, a new scar on her right forearm, the same worn vest and patched trousers and twice-resoled boots, the same flat, assessing look. "You came back," Marin said. "I owed them a visit." Marin smiled, that same small expression barely there that Keithra had seen once before. They sat on the rock. The clearing was different. The garden plot had expanded, and a second prefab shelter stood behind the first, housing 2 Torvathi researchers who had arrived the previous year under a grant that the Biological Survey had funded, citing the documentary's impact. The researchers were young, quiet, and had learned Marin's methods. They carried clipboards. They did not carry powered equipment. V' came down the trail at 600. He was older. His stride had lost a fraction of its silent precision, and the crystalline spines along his crest were duller, their light less vivid. But he was still massive, still deliberate, still the creature that had stopped Keithra's words in her throat 8 years ago. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. He looked at Marin. He looked at Keithra. His crest spines flattened into receptive calm. He walked to Marin's rock and pressed his muzzle against her palm. 3 seconds. The morning greeting unchanged. Then he turned his head and looked at Keithra. He took 1 step toward her. His primary nostrils flared. He leaned forward and his muzzle touched Keithra's palm. The contact lasted 1 second. His chemoreceptor pits sampled her. His 6 eyes assessed her. His crystalline spines hummed once, a single low note that Keithra felt in her wrist. Then he pulled back, turned, and continued down the trail. Keithra looked at Marin. Marin was writing in her field journal. "What was that?" Keithra asked. "He remembers you. You sat behind me. You did not make noise. You did not bring the machines." Marin's pen moved across the page. "He knows who protected them." C3 emerged from the tree line. She was enormous now, nearly the matriarch's size, her scale plates fully hardened, her crystalline spines brilliant with refracted light. She was followed by 2 cubs of her own, tiny and translucent spined, and tripping over their own feet. She walked to Marin's rock, lowered her head, and pressed her muzzle against Marin's knee. The cubs tumbled over each other and piled against Marin's boots. Marin rested 1 hand on C3's crest. The great predator's eyes closed. The cubs chirped. The clearing hummed with the sound Marin had taught Keithra to recognize, the low harmonic of a family at rest. The contact maintenance vocalization that meant safety and belonging. The sound that every survey drone and armored vehicle and orbital scan in the galaxy's history had been too loud and too far away to hear. Keithra raised her camera. The passive lens caught the scene in the green-gold light, a woman, a predator, and 2 new lives pressing against boots that had walked this ground for 5 years and would walk it for years more. She did not need 41 seconds of silence this time. She knew exactly what she was looking at. "When did you know?" Keithra asked. Marin did not look up from her journal. "Know what?" "That they were not what the reports said. That they were more." Marin's pen stopped. She looked at C3's closed eyes, at V'Prime's shape disappearing into the canopy, at the cubs wrestling against her ankles. The day V Prime touched my hand for the first time, she said. I had been sitting on that rock for 42 days. He walked out of the tree line at dawn just like every morning, and he stopped 4 meters away just like every morning. But that day he did not stop. He came forward and pressed his muzzle to my palm, and I knew, not because of the contact, because of what the contact cost him. He had to override every instinct that told him I was other. He had to choose. And he chose to trust me. She looked at Keithra. That is what the surveys and the drones and the armored vehicles will never see. They measure the teeth and the claws and the speed and the kill radius, and they file a report that says dangerous. And they are right. The Veska are dangerous, but dangerous is not all they are. They are a family that teaches its children and grieves its dead and chooses who it trusts. The surveys missed that because they never sat still long enough to be chosen. Behind her, the jungle breathed. The bioluminescent glow shifted as the morning deepened. The cubs had settled against Marin's boots, their translucent spines pulsing faintly. C3 lay beside the rock, her 6 eyes half closed, her massive body curved toward Marin in the posture of a predator at rest among its own. Keithra filmed it. She filmed the green-gold light, and the quiet, and the woman who had sat still long enough to be chosen, and the creatures that had done the choosing. She filmed it knowing that the footage would be seen by millions, and that not one of them would understand it the way she did, because understanding required what could not be broadcast: the smell of the jungle floor, the subsonic vibration through the rock, the weight of stillness held for hours and days and years, until trust grew in the space between species like something organic, something alive, something that no survey report would ever contain. She filmed it, and she was grateful. The cubs slept. The matriarch watched from the canopy. V Prime patrolled the perimeter. And Marin wrote in her journal, the pen scratching softly, the only sound that any of them had ever needed to hear.